Hello everyone, welcome to this first lesson of the first course that I'm going to upload here on YouTube about Blender. So this course is called 3D Modeling, Shading and Rendering in Blender, and this course will have 10 lessons. So the first lesson is Introduction to Blender and Blender's interface. So anyways, let's get started with the first lesson. Introduction and Blender's interface. In this lesson, we're going to look at 4 things. We will get to know the default interface of Blender. We will quickly talk about the editors in Blender. We will look at Workspaces, and we will learn how to customize and save our preferences for Blender's interface. So let's jump right into Blender and start working. So here I am in Blender. I'm not going to talk about how to download it because Blender is completely free, and if you're watching this video you already, I assume that you have already downloaded Blender. If you haven't, please go to blender.org/download. It's completely free. After you have downloaded, install and open, you will see something like this. So this simple window is called splash screen, and we don't need that now. You can see one thing that might be important is this Blender's version. I'm using 4.1.0. This is the newest stable version of Blender. If you click anywhere else, it will go away, and if you ever need it back, you can come here to upper left corner, click on this Blender icon and splash screen, it will come back. So this is the interface. Immediately you will see a vast area here, which will be our playground. We will add stuff and create stuff here. But first of all, let's look at the menu, Blender's menu. It's the first thing to know if we want to know Blender's interface. So the first menu is File menu. Here, I would say the most important things: new project. You can create new project, open recent projects, open some project which is located on your computer. You can save your project. You can also quit and do a few other things. We will look at them too. The next menu is Edit menu. The only thing that we ever use Edit menu is to go to Preferences, and now Preferences has its own shortcut right here, and you don't even need to come here. I don't usually use anything else from here. Render, it has its own menu dedicated. Rendering is the process of creating a photo or video of whatever you have made in the scene. So we'll learn how to render stuff in the future. And then we have Window menu. I probably never use it, and you might not use it either. The only thing that I ever touch is this toggle window full screen. I usually like to work in full screen. And then this help menu. If you ever need help, online help, you can come here. Go to, for example, Blender's manual, and Blender has a wonderful manual there. You can go. And it recently updated, and it's more comfortable and more readable. It's a fantastic manual. So right next to it we have Workspaces, and if you look carefully, we are inside this layout Workspaces. We will talk about Workspace a bit later. Now let's look at the main part of the interface. And if you look carefully, the interface is divided into areas or regions, or in each region you have a separate editor. These are called editors. We'll talk about editors too. So let's look at this biggest window or biggest area. This is called the scene, our scene. By the way, I am pressing the middle mouse button and dragging to orbit around the scene. Then you can see it from here too. Anyway, this biggest window is called the scene, and its official name is 3D viewport. Where you can view all of your stuff. And everything that you see in the 3D viewport is usually an object, or usually objects, right? I'm left clicking to select these objects. And 3D viewport has its own menu here, and you can find all the tools, all the options here in these menus. But these are context sensitive, or these are based on which mode you are in. For example, if you have different modes for different operations, different purposes. For example, you have edit mode. We will talk about edit mode. And as soon as you go to edit mode, the menu changes, the tools change. So yeah, we'll talk about that. And then just right to this window, left to the window, we have tools. Like other software, Blender has tons of tools, and they are usually located on the left right here. There are lots and lots of tools. And these are also context sensitive, or these will change depending on what mode we are in, what our purpose, what we want to make in Blender. For example, again, if I go to edit mode, there are more tools. We'll talk about them. In sculpt mode, there are even more tools. We'll talk about them in separate free courses here on YouTube. So let's go back to object mode. So these are menus, these are tools, and we have these things. Don't worry about them too much. This is orientation. I would say these will define where our right is, where the front is, or where south, east, north, and stuff like that is. Simply, or you don't have to understand now. So the next one is called the pivot point, based on which point the transformations happen, and this will define what central point you want to use. And snapping is kind of it's restricting movement, scale, and rotation. And it's not actually restricting, it's actually applying some sort of measures. And yeah, it's a complex, it can be a complex topic if you're completely new to that kind of stuff. Snapping, you can see this magnet, which means your transformations might snap to certain measurements or to certain features in the scene. And then we have proportional editing. You don't have to know this now because this is not used very often. And then we have these options. We won't touch the first two, but this one is interesting. You can click on this orange area and everything disappears. So this drop-down menu deals with what you are able to see in this 3D viewport and what you are not able to see usually. And then we have these balls. I don't know if they are balls, but they are 4. Anyway, so these deal with Blender's way of calculating the visual appearance of the objects in your scene. So we will talk about them. For now, we won't touch them either. And these tools are navigation tools, and there is a camera tool too. If you click on this, for example, you look at the scene through a camera. You take a camera in your hands and you look at the scene. You turn on your camera and you look at the scene with the camera, and this is the camera. And these gizmos, you can just hover and you can see this white circle. As soon as you hover over these areas, you can left click and drag to orbit around the scene. It's the same as holding down the middle mouse button and dragging, but you can just click on one of these letters, for example X. You have this zooming option. You can left click and hold and drag up and down to zoom in and out. You can pan. We will talk about them a bit more in the next video. So these are simply navigation tools, and there is one hidden tool here in this 3D viewport, which is here, little arrow key. You can press on this and you can see it. You can just drag and hide it, open it, hide it, and there is a little shortcut for this on the keyboard. You can press N key, N. You can see the key from here too. I think this is probably the first shortcut I'm talking about in Blender. Actually, Blender is famous for its shortcuts. There are tons and tons of shortcuts, and you will always be using them. So I think this is probably a bit too much about the introduction of this 3D viewport, but I'd like this to be as comprehensive as possible. I think that's all, and let's go to the right of this 3D viewport, to the top right hand side corner. Here you have this window called outliner. This is an outliner editor. You probably understand what this is. It outlines everything in your scene in a kind of listed order. It's a good way to sort things out, find things, hide things, unhide things, and collect things in different collections or folders. Everything here will be listed here in a different in a different view. You can, for example, hide this lamp, and the lamp is not visible in the scene, but it is here, it is staying here. You can unhide it You can sort things out, you can create new folders and organize your objects into folders for better work. And let's quickly talk about this bottom window. This is a timeline for, you probably know that this is for animation. You can play animation, you can stop it, you can play backwards and you can stop, and you can jump from keyframe to keyframe with these two buttons, but we don't have any keyframes. Keyframes are for animation, and you can go back and forth to the end and to the beginning of the time with these buttons. There are shortcuts for that. We'll learn that in separate course. So, and the last part here, a little bar, I would say, it's a status bar, and it will show what you can do or what you are doing right now, as you can see. And there is some information about your scene and all the objects on your scene, in your scene. You probably don't see them here. If you don't see, come hover over the status bar, right click and turn on scene statistics if you don't see them. And finally, let's talk about this feature-rich area. The most important part, one of the most important parts of Blender after this 3D viewport, I would say. This is properties editor, and there are tons of things here, and some of them are context sensitive. If you, for example, select this, left click and select this object, there are a few more things. If you select this light, you don't see as many things. So this is a central part, like you have a lot of things here, like render engine, what engine you will use for rendering your stuff, output properties, where you will save your images or videos and stuff. You will configure the formats and other things. View layer, scene layer, I usually don't go there. World settings, you have this world settings. Let me quickly change something, for example. And nothing changed because you will change it from here. You can click on world, and this is how you will change things, right? It's just crazy to do that. Let's go back. Don't do that, please. I just showed, and this is collection properties, these folder properties, object properties, modifiers. Blender has some very powerful modifiers here, hidden, ready to be used. And we have particle system, dynamic, static, hair particles and dynamic particles. Blender has fantastic physics properties, physics tools, simulation tools, and then we have constraints which will help greatly in animation. Object data properties, all objects have different properties here specific to that object. For example, camera has camera type, focal length, all kinds of different stuff related to cameras, and lights have, for example, color, strength, and all that stuff. So, and we have texture properties, the central texture properties panel in Blender. You always have this to work with textures. I mean, create textures, delete textures. And the first thing which I didn't talk about is tool properties or tool options. If you select any tool from here, you will have tool options here. But yeah, that's everything about this properties panel, and that's for now, that's everything about Blender's interface. But I'd like to show you something else, which are called editors. Let's quickly talk about editors. So everything that I showed you, every panel, every area here, 1, 2, 3, 4, not this guy, not this last bottom part, this is just a status bar. All these areas are actually separate editors. For example, this is an outliner editor. It's called editor in Blender. Well, let's call it outliner. Let's call it a separate feature. This is properties, called properties, as I said. 3D viewport. I'm just saying official names, right? Outliner, properties, 3D viewport, timeline. And these are just 1, 2, 3, 4 editors. Blender has a lot more editors than this. If you want to see all the editors that Blender has, you can come to any area actually, whether it's a 3D viewport, outliner, properties, or even timeline, any editor. If you look at the top left corner of each editor, you see this drop-down menu with this kind of different icon. Here, for example, you have a clock icon. Here you have this strange icon, I don't know what to say, hierarchy icon. and the settings icon. So if you click on one of them, you see all the editors that Blender has, and you can see properties is highlighted. It's a new thing. Before it didn't highlight. Now it's highlighted. Outliner is highlighted. Here you can see 3D viewport is highlighted because this area is 3D viewport, this area is properties, this area is timeline, and you can see all other editors here. And you can change editors from there too. For example, if you want to have a little 3D viewport here, you can change it. Come here and choose 3D viewport, and you have a small 3D viewport here if you want. Come back to outliner. You can change each area to a different editor, as you can see here. So this is, we'll talk about other editors when we need them, but for now this is more than enough. So this is about editors, and now let's look at these workspaces. So we have modeling workspace, and as soon as I go there, a few things have changed. First of all, 3D viewport didn't change. We just went to a second mode, which is the edit mode. This is basically a modeling mode. We have sculpting. This 3D viewport didn't change, outliner didn't change, and this properties didn't change. As you can see, everything is staying the same, but the mode has changed. It's a different purpose. We are going to sculpt this within this mode. And you can come to UV editing. We'll talk about this too. And here, a big change happened. Here you have UV editor, I would say, texture paint, shading, animation, rendering. So depending on what we want to do in Blender, we can use different editors and we can layout them. We can put them in different layouts and create a separate workspace for that purpose. For example, in texture paint workspace, we have image editor mode set to paint mode here, and we have 3D viewport here to look at the results. We can directly paint on our 3D models or directly paint on our textures. This properties editor has changed to, it's still the properties editor, but we are tool properties here. So yeah, you can create your own workspaces. For example, let's say, I don't know, maybe duplicate current layout, and you can rename it by double clicking on it, and or just custom or something, right? And you can change this area, for example, to, I don't know, file browser, or maybe it's outliner. This one is just a, I don't know, asset browser. This one is, I don't know, in animation, it is graph editor. And this area stays the same. So you can change this and create your own custom workspace with different editors laid out in different areas. So you can create, let's delete this mess. So I have just deleted it. You can click and delete. You can duplicate and other things. Sometimes I delete some workspace which I don't usually use. So now we have talked about workspace. Now let's quickly talk about customizing and saving different property preferences, I would say. Let's say I don't like this size. I usually like it this size, right? And I don't like this size, and let's go down and make it a bit smaller, or make it a bit larger. Or let's say I don't like this area at all. Let's say I always use, but let's say I never use it. I will right click here in the middle, this darker line, anywhere between them. You can right click and you can just join areas. Let's say just like that. You can join areas. Let's join. I like this, right? But if I work like this, and if I close Blender after I finish working and reopen Blender, it will not retain this interface. It will just go back to its original interface, default interface. It will not keep our settings. In order to keep that, we can come here to File, and we can come here to Defaults and Save Startup File. But remember, you only do this with a clean project, with a default project, not something that you have already made. if you save, if you make something, for example, you made a car, you worked for a long time, and it's a large model, and if you default it with that car, it means whenever you open Blender, you open that project, which is not ideal. So just open Blender, and with a default, maybe default cube, or you can delete this default cube, or if you can keep it with this clean project, with your whatever change you have. You can change a lot of things, as I showed here. You can just right click and do other things. You experiment with that. I'm not going to go into too many details. So you can change everything. You make Blender look whatever you like, and then File, Defaults, and Save Starter File, but with a clean project, with a default cube. So, and then you do that, and if you close Blender and reopen, Blender will keep all of your custom preferences. So yeah, let's create new project, because I don't like this crazy thing. So as you can see, it is still the original default interface. So as a last thing, I will show you one thing. It will be interesting to you, I hope. Edit, Preferences, and you have a lot of preference. You have a lot of settings here. This is Blender settings, but don't play too much with this, because you might change something and you might not find it again. So actually themes. This is what I wanted to show you. And you have presets. You can change this theme. For example, I like deep gray, and I'm using deep gray, but Blender's default theme is Blender Dark. This is what you see when you open Blender. This is also great, but for some reason I like deep gray preference usually, and I saved it, as you saw. And I also like this XSI. I don't know why. It's a beautiful theme. So to sum up, in this video, we have looked at Blender's default interface and hopefully learned what is where. We also looked at editors. There are so many editors, and we learned how to change editors, how to change the layout. We also looked at workspaces, which are basically different layouts with different editors for specific purposes. And finally, we learned how to customize the interface and how to save our preferences, like a theme, which is an interesting option. So that was everything for this video. And as a final note, I'd like to let you know that you can support us. And the best or easiest way is to give this video a like, of course, if you liked it. Or if you had any problems, you can always comment below the video. And if you want to learn everything in Blender, you can get my paid course on Udemy, and you will get the content that you see on your screen. It's more than 36 hours. We will cover more than 150 topics in Blender, in more than 220 lessons, and 6 projects. Please check out that course by following the link in the description below. If you get that course, you will have a great course in Blender, and you will also support us. So thank you for watching. See you in the next video.